Welcome, everyone. Welcome from Warsaw at another in a series of our freighted legacy seminars, Dziedzictwa Obarczone. That's the Polish equivalent of the name of a series of discussions we're having online, which allow us to explore the topics of cultural and historical interactions between the Jewish and Polish community in the Polish land specifically, or beyond them, as the case may be. Tonight, we are honored by another important speaker who will touch on, I believe, perennially important topic of the next generation of survivors, referred commonly to as the second generation. The title of tonight's seminar is The Significant Legacy of Memory Among the Second Generation. And the speaker tonight will be David Kader, apologies, who has completed his illustrious legal academic career, and has been a professor for a number of years, going into many decades, four score years, and now very active in exploring the subject matter at hand, particularly as a child of survivors. He will speak about that in greater detail in a moment. I will hand over to him, but it's worth underscoring that that David has been very active in speaking and teaching and lecturing on the subject of memory amongst this generation, and the transfer of that generation from the previous, those so powerfully touched or hurt in many cases by the horrors of Shoah. And he has been very active in the Jewish community, particularly, and has sat on a number of committees, advisory boards, including that of the Friends of Jewish Renewal in Poland. Hence, the relationship with us, a close one that also expresses itself through this series, which Beit Polska, which is located in Poland, and the Friends of Jewish Renewal, located in the United States of America, have joined hands and hopefully done something useful for a transfer of cultural heritage that we all carry and feel responsible to carry. Without further ado, David, handing over to you. The floor is yours, and we now are all ears, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Marek. I'm very grateful for this invitation, and I hope by sharing at least one essay, maybe two, they're fairly short, it can lay the foundation for a conversation in the time we are permitted here, and maybe subsequently as well. Let me begin with just one slight introduction before reading the first essay, and that is, I really believe we are essentially our memories. I recently had an exchange with my 7-year-old granddaughter when she was wondering, given knee transplants, and I had a heart surgery and replaced an aortic valve, and she wondered who we were. And we had an interesting conversation in which I tried to share with her that we aren't our body parts. And she wondered if, given all these abilities to change body parts, what if we changed our brains? A very provocative and thoughtful insight from a 7-year-old. And I said to her, I thought if I had someone else's brain, I would no longer be myself. That in essence, because our brains convey or contain our experiences, our memories, we are essentially our memories. With that said, in my retirement, it became possible for me to think more profoundly, I hope, more deeply about the responsibility, the duty to share certain memories, with the recognition that memories are not history, that they combine with all kinds of problematics. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I recognize the challenge of capturing, recording, and transmitting memory. Despite that, I've made the effort. And the second generation, which is mostly in their 60s and 70s, are trying to do that. Some of them in book form. I have not yet done a book, but I have a number of essays already published and a few more ready to submit for publication. And tonight I have, or today, it's morning in Arizona from where I am speaking, and I know some of you are in Poland and elsewhere. I have two essays that I have published. One, they're both fairly short. One, a narrative that I'm going to read in a moment, and the other, a little bit more of a modernistic, impressionistic piece about my father. If time permits, I would love to share that as well. Well, with that by way of hello and thank you, let me share this piece that I've titled, Everyone Has a Name. The world knows the face of Anne Frank, and we know the name that goes with that face, which in so many ways is and may always remain the singular human visage of what we call the Holocaust. I wish to introduce yet another girl, a little girl, another face, and the story of my discovery of her fate and her name. The story was some 30 years old when I traveled to Europe with my mother, her first and only return to Europe since leaving in 1949 as a refugee survivor of the Holocaust. Though she was from Poland, and after the war was in a displaced person camp in the American zone of Germany, she wanted, in this return, to visit Paris, France. My mother, Lola, had an older beloved sister, Zipporah, her only full sibling, who left the family in Radom, Poland in the mid-30s to live with an aunt in Paris. My mother never saw her sister again, but spoke of her often, and even wished my wife and I would name our daughter Zipporah after her sister, whom she never stopped missing. Zipporah married a Polish-born French Jew, and they had a child together. Mother and child, Zipporah and her daughter, were murdered in the Holocaust. The father survived as a POW, having served in the French army, and was never detected as a Jew while held a prisoner. On our arrival in Paris, so very many years later, my mother mentioned that it was possible, even if improbable, that Zipporah's husband, my mother's brother-in-law, might still be alive and living in Paris, if maybe not elsewhere in France. She had some minimal contact with him after the war into the early 1950s, but nothing of consequence ever since. My mother gave us his name, Shulam Malach, and sure enough, he was in the Paris phone book and lived in a street away from the luxurious Place Vendôme. My wife, Pat, traveled with my mother and me on this trip. Pat speaks French fluently. She called the number in the phone book, and to our astonishment, he answered. Pat told him of our presence in Paris, how Lola, his long-lost sister-in-law, would like to see him. He nicely agreed, and we arranged a meeting the very next afternoon at a cafe near our hotel. Sister-in-law and brother-in-law meeting for the first time in a city my mother's beloved sister had fled to, and to where my mother herself had tried on a number of occasions throughout the late 1930s to reach as well, but without success. And hence the tragic irony that Zipporah in France perishes in the Holocaust while my mother in Poland survives. At this absolutely extraordinary meeting, in which French and Yiddish and some Hebrew and a bit of English and who knows what else, Polish, was spoken, details of the 1930s and 40s and beyond were captured. Without question, however, the emotional moment of this reunion was his showing us a number of photographs he brought with him of Mother Zipporah and her daughter, taken before the war. Emotional not just for my mother, of course, but my realization that I was looking at my aunt and my cousin. The conversation lasted hours. For my mother, the trip to Paris exceeded her fondest and most sober expectations. Shulam Malach was kind enough to have made copies of the accompanying photos, and one of them, mother and daughter, hangs in the study of my home in Arizona, and I now wish to leave the text and show you the photograph. Over the years, subsequent to this trip, I often looked at this photo on my study wall and saw my mother in her sister and my sister in my cousin. The similarities in appearance are striking, and why not? For we are close relatives. I also wondered, as I pondered at the image, about their lives in the fateful, fearful days in Paris and their deaths. But oddly and somewhat shamefully, I began to wonder about the little girl's name. She had always been nameless to me and was in that Paris conversation years ago. The focus was on Zipporah, the mother, understandably for my mother. But now for me, to me, I kept staring at the little girl, lost in the Holocaust. One of some 1.5 million children murdered. And I felt shame. I didn't know her name, little else, her age. She seemed less than 5. Where exactly did she live with her mother and father in Paris? When exactly was she born? The date? What happened exactly? What was her name? A call to Paris was to no avail, as the father we met there was ill and unable to talk to us. So the information I sought was not possible by that means. And in a subsequent call, we learned of his passing. But then in a series of coincidences, what seemed unlikely in ever knowing more of this child became possible. First, I received the annual report of the Beta Klarsfeld Foundation, an organization to which I contribute annually a modest amount of money to support their work. Beta and her husband Serge are likely best known to the public as Nazi hunters. They are based in Paris, and over the past 45 or so years have been instrumental in bringing to justice numerous major Nazis, including Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, and others responsible for the deportation of Jews from occupied France. They also assisted in the case against Papon, chief police officer of Bordeaux in Vichy, France, and Lou Brunner, the last survivor of the Eichmann team, and the list goes on. Beyond the Nazi hunting, the Klarsfelds have over three decades meticulously sought to document the face of each and every Jew deported to their death from France during the Holocaust. This effort led them to publish a memorial book with all of the names they could establish of those deported, and they numbered 76,000. Moreover, in their subsequent project was to name all the children under 18 years of age and obtain basic biographical information on each and photographs of them as well, if possible. The total of such children numbered 11,174. Might one of them be my cousin, daughter of Zipporah? Let me bring you back to the Klarsfeld annual report. In it, they described a traveling exhibition by the foundation entitled French Children of the Holocaust. The exhibit had even traveled through the eastern United States, as well as to the Jewish Community Center in La Jolla, California, which is near San Diego. The report describes the exhibition, but also contains images of the display. I took a careful look at each panel of photos, hoping just maybe to see if any was similar to the photo I received in Paris nearly 10 years previously. The images in the report are very small, but after some 5 minutes or so, using a magnifying glass, I might add, I found the photo. The Klarsfelds had the very same photo of Zipporah and her daughter that I have on my study wall, which I showed you a moment ago, and that we both had indeed acquired from Shulam Malach. With this discovery, I decided during a planned trip to England for work and pleasure to detour to Paris to see if my question about the little girl could be answered at the Klarsfeld Foundation. My wife, Pat, my adult daughter, Sarah, and I went to Paris with the singular ambition of learning what we could about the little girl in the picture. In Paris, we went to 32 Rue La Boétie, the address of the Klarsfeld Foundation. The location is on a most fashionable and busy street intersecting the Champs-Élysées, and I was expecting to find a business office sort of place. But on our arrival, we stood in front of a most elegant grill gate looking into a marvelous courtyard. We took an exterior elevator to the 4th floor, the exact location of the foundation address, and simply knocked on the door. We were astonished that none other than Betta Klarsfeld herself answered, and it was immediately apparent that we were at the Klarsfeld home and not some foundation office. After explaining ourselves with apologies for arriving unannounced, given that we did not expect to be at their domestic door, she kindly let us in. We told her our interests, but without any success. And as we were preparing to leave, she brought out the just published book of theirs on the Jewish children of France, deported during the Holocaust. She said the photos in the touring exhibit featured in the annual report were selected from those in this massive book she had before us. Let me show you that massive book. This is that book. It is indeed massive. Feeling we had possibly already overstayed our welcome, coming totally unannounced, making no appointment or prior call, not expecting to meet the Klarsfelds in their home, I didn't think it polite or permissible to ask to remain so I could turn each page of this 1,500-page volume. But as we visited a bit longer and sang our farewells, I began to simply leaf through the book at some 50 or 60 pages at a time. And doing so, I hit upon the following picture in this massive book that is also, as I showed you, on my wall. I spun the book around on the table around which we were seated to show the full page image to Pat, my wife, and Sarah, my daughter. Sarah's eyes widened, knowing immediately what we found. Pat's eyes began to tear, and Betta leapt up from her chair at the table and began shouting, "Serge, Serge!" and left the room to find her husband. Pat, Sarah, and I sat in shock and joy, awaiting Betta's return. Betta returned with Serge, who in his hands had documents telling so much of the life and death of Zipporah and the little girl. I felt both fulfilled and empty at the same time. Overjoyed in the knowing, empty in the absence. I needed to tell my mother what I now knew of her sister and niece. And so later that day, I wrote the following to Lola of Zipporah and her child. And this letter to my mother concludes this essay. Dear Mom, her name is Claudine. She was born in Paris on March 14, 1939. With Zipporah, she was arrested on December 31, 1942, and immediately sent to Drancy, the squalid, horrible transit camp just northeast of Paris. They languished there without any of the amenities of normal life, be it soap or towels or the ability to be clean in body or clothing. Only some cold water and little food for over a month. On February 11, 1943, they were deported with 998 other souls. In sealed cars of a freight train, they were sent to Auschwitz. Convoy 47. The trip took 2 full days. They arrived on February 13. 196 adults were selected for work, of which 14 survived the war, 13 men and 1 woman. The remaining 802, of which 183 were children, 84 boys and 99 girls, were gassed and murdered immediately on arrival. I think of the 2 of those 802 as being Zipporah, only 27, and her little girl, Claudine, not yet 4. I write this to you, dear Mom, from Paris, in the afternoon in which I learned all of this. And it is March 14, Claudine's birthday. She could have been 61 this day. We now have her name, Claudine. Be well, Mom. Much love, Mom. David. I'm happy to handle any comments or questions regarding that essay. I'm also happy to move on to the next one, which is about as long, a little shorter.
If there are any questions, please write them in chat and we'll be happy to give the answers, or if you have any comments. There is a comment from Cindy Bendat saying that it's a very, very powerful story.
Should I read the second one?
Yes, let's read the second one, but if there will be questions or comments regarding the first one, we still welcome them in the chat.
Of course. And I see we got plenty of time. The second one is a little bit shorter, and then happy to have a conversation about either or the topic in general. The first one, of course, was an effort to capture something that was very important to my mother, and so telling, I hope, shared a little bit about my mother. This one is not a narrative in the same way. It's an amalgam of conversations over many years I had with my father. And most of these exchanges took place in Israel. I once asked my father, where would he like to go in the world? You want to go back to Poland? You want to go to the moon? Where would you like to go? And he said, take me to Israel. So we went to Israel with my wife, and at that time, our son, 7-year-old son, Aaron. And so this essay of sorts is called Fragments. Let me share it with you. It begins with a quote from the Torah, which reads, that you smashed and you shall deposit them, in reference to the Ten Commandments. It teaches us that both the tablets and the fragments were deposited in the ark, which teaches us also, in my view, that the only heart is a broken heart. My father was a dancer, waltz, polka, foxtrot, even jitterbug, but mostly the rumba. He loved a woman's hand in his, to see her shoulder, hold her waist. He ate everything but nails and wood, he said. Food was taken seriously, a meal cherished. I once asked him how he survived the Second World War in his Siberian imprisonment. Garlic saved my life, he said. They called him Munyak in Warsaw, Jake at the factory in the Great San Joaquin Valley when a refugee, Jack on the streets of Fresno, California, Moshe in his home. The century renamed him again and again in its image. My father, Moshe, the dancer, spoke Polish, Yiddish, German, Russian, English, some Czech, and some Romanian, and read and sang Hebrew, but mostly language of silence in the years of the tyrants. A postcard from the Warsaw Ghetto to his Siberian prison camp telling of the end. The message alone escaped. My father, Moshe the dancer, once said, tyrants take away your future. They take away your past. Only now they leave you. Once so hungry, he recalls imagining the taste of his own heart. Shallow graves in the frozen Mother Earth of Poland to hold the murdered children that the living chose to bury to save from the crow and the rat. I, David Jacob, am his third child in his second family. A boy twin I am to a girl. My elder siblings, a girl and a boy, stand and sit by a tree next to their mother before they were burned with wood under a blind sky. The world may stand on mitzvot prayer and acts of kindness, but it trembles in the threat of human cruelty and the fact of human indifference to the tears and fears of others. After 6 years, 6 long and hollow years, he thinks, go home. By Mongolia's edge he treks. Through Kazakhstan, his legs carry him. He finds a brother jumping trains, another brother in Tashkent. Through Uzbekistan they go, to the welcome mat at the door of his house, on his street, in his Polish town, now with strangers at the window. A fist to his temple, another to his heart, with a hearty, go home, Jew. Do not return if you wish to keep your life. Stuttgart displaced person camp. Chocolates, cigarettes, meat, nylons, bananas, dealing in the black market. Love Lola, twins, the story of Job. Palestine, Canada, New York City, the North Pole, Fresno, California, full stop. Nightmares, curses. I want them all back. The thief, the whore, the awful, those full of awe. Take a pomegranate, bite hard into its crust and flesh. Chew just once or twice and spit the pit out against some wall. Now, put the pomegranate back together. I asked once my father, where was the front line? He answered, wherever a tear. I once asked, what did you read before they burned books? He answered, Kant, Marx, Tolstoy, in Yiddish. I met them, he said. I once asked, where was God? He answered, where was man? I once asked, why didn't you flee? He answered, why? Were they going to kill us all? And to where? I once asked, why do you pray? He answered, when I pray, I see the face of my mother and the face of my father, like yesterday. I once asked, shall we travel to Poland sometime, us together? He answered, Poland is for me a cemetery. I asked, what about memory? He answered, remember the future. I once asked, to think the world's beginnings have taken us to this debris. He answered, breathe the breath given to you. I once asked, is life good? He answered, life today is good. I once asked, would you want to live life again as it went? He answered, one life is enough, Dovidel. I once asked, why is the way not straight? He answered, if you want freedom, the way is not direct. Think of Sinai. I once asked, shall we rest? He answered, of walking, of talking, of singing, I am never tired. We will have sleep forever later. I once asked, such a life as yours and so long, now into your 80s, what is most remarkable to you? The inventions of the century, the discoveries, what? He answered, freedom. I once asked, tell me of death. He answered, death is nothing. Life. Life is something. Ask me about life. I once asked, what is life? He answered, life is with people. I once asked, why be happy? He answered, to be happy is a mitzvah to the world. Anyone can despair. But to be happy. I once asked, is there paradise? He answered, the smell of your patalas challah on Shabbat is paradise. When Shabbat becomes Shabbat, that is paradise. To see your little Sarala dancing and your Grojec Aaron davening, that has paradise. I once asked, do you answer all questions? He answered. In the second half of his life, he took long daily walks, the dancer did. For the heart and the lungs, he said. Of course, for the heart. Embedded with shards of glass and knitted together by the muscles and tendons of memories that need exercise. And of course, for the legs that outraces the tyrant's whirlwind and can't stop, even with a USA passport. 1986, he wept before the Bill of Rights at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Why are you crying? I asked him. I am here with you, free. My father Moshe, the dancer, was a patriot of no place, but the place called freedom. And all his life he sang Sim Shalom, grant peace to all the world. The miracle of his life outlasts him in us. But for him, the miracles are over. Adon Olam, I shall not fear, body and spirit is in his keep. Keep fragments near and dear, for the only whole heart is a broken heart.
Thank you very much for reading this another story. And let me now refer to the questions and comments that we are having in our chat. First of them is coming from Viktor Baginski, and it says, thank you very much for sharing these heartbreaking stories and emotions. I would like to ask about the first story. Did the lack of knowledge of the fate of the missing persons of the other family members, the functioning of the family, and did the discovery of their fate change a lot? Did it end the mourning, and will these stories appear in print? A lot of questions in one.
Yeah, a lot of questions, good questions. Let me answer the simple one. Yes, the two stories I read have appeared in print in the Journal of the Emeritus College at my home university, Arizona State University. I don't know. I mean, it's a tough question to easily answer. I don't think mourning, if I understand the question, or grief ever ends. It mutates, it changes. The more I come to know of those lost in my family or even some friends, the grief mutates and changes, but it doesn't go away. And the phrase that I hear a lot when I hear about trauma, about closure, I don't think there's ever real closure. And the reason, for me at least, is not difficult when I think about my own feelings to understand, which is when you lose somebody, even in a non-traumatic circumstance, you grieve. And the degree of grief, to some extent, is a measure of the degree of love that you had for or feel about the person that's gone. Grief is a kind of, to use a mundane metaphor, a tax. It's what you pay in life for the goodness that you had with somebody. And that doesn't go away. The love doesn't go away, even though the person's gone, and nor does the grief. So there's no closure, but there is a desire in my part, and I think in many in the second generation that are inclined to embody this responsibility of memory and put it into print, is in some ways acting out this enduring love, which doesn't end. So I don't know if that's helpful or answers the question, but for me, it's an enormous sadness and celebration to know Zipporah's daughter's name, to know her birthday, to know what happened.
We also have a question from Andrea White. Had your father heard anything about the Jewish renewal in Poland?
No, sadly, my father died in 1992. What is that? That's 30 years ago, at least. So no, he did not. And also, sadly, to some extent, I might say, I did not either until Rabbi Chaim Beliak, the wonderful, blessed nudge that he is, persuaded me to travel once to Poland some years ago with him and others, that introduced me to the Jewish renewal in Poland. So that's late in my life as well. But no, my father has been gone for many, many years, and so did not.
We also have a comment from Cindy Bendat, another powerful and emotional story. Are you writing a book with these stories and others?
Well, I hope it might be a book eventually. I have others. One is already written, not yet submitted for publication, and others I'm thinking about. I can share the one that's pretty much done. I don't have a title for it, though it's tentatively called Echoes. But some of my earliest memories of what we now call the Holocaust or the Shoah are from my childhood, when the word was not coined and I didn't know what was going on in my family in terms of the trauma my parents were experiencing. My father had a wife and 2 kids that were murdered by the Nazis. My mother was in Auschwitz. She was surgically operated upon by Mengele. I didn't know any of that as a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old. But I experienced certain events in the home that remain. And so I once gave a talk, actually, many years ago, called The Nonverbal Communication of the Holocaust. The whole idea of the transmission of trauma, I don't think so much genetically, though some believe it occurs even at the chromosomal level, but by those experiences. So I've tried to capture those events and that will come out, I hope, if it's accepted for publication, and some others. And so there may be, at some point, if I keep at it, enough of these reflections, these memories, that would be deserving of some book publication. But I'm a bit of a ways from that, but it's very kind of the questioner to ask such a question.
Thank you very much for this answer. And now we have a question and comment from Ter Winant. Thanks so much, David. You remind me that there is so much second generation work still to do in Fresno. A comment from Rabbi Chaim Beliak, powerful and demanding, mourning is a continuing process. And a comment from Judith Raphael, I no longer grieve or mourn my parents, but I still miss them greatly. My dad died in 1996, my mom in 2004.
Sure. I mean, that's totally understandable. And it matters what grief means. Missing someone, I guess, needn't be labeled grief. But, you know, we come into the world pretty much alone, but happily we depart not alone, except those that often are murdered and taken from us violently. But we grieve our personal stories, and I think we can grieve the stories of others. I don't know if I'll have this statement accurate, but there is a saying that goes something like, if you feel pain, it means you're alive. If you can feel the pain of others, it means you're a human.
These were all the questions that we had until now. Are we having any other questions or comments? Yes, it seems like these were the questions that were asked. And thank you very much for sharing both those essays and your thoughts and answering the questions of our participants. It was very important for us to hear those stories and to think about them. And I would like also to invite all of our participants for the next webinar, which will be happening on January 21st. And its title is The Concerns of Polish Progressive Judaism's Foremost Leader, Rabbi Oziasz Thon. And this webinar will be led by Professor Ronen, who will introduce us to this remarkable Polish rabbi. Until recently, the legacy of Rabbi Thon's intellectual and life experience have been shrouded by the Holocaust and subsequent events, most importantly, the establishment of the State of Israel. And right now, Rabbi Thon's significance emerges for diaspora communities committed to their national identity and to the Jewish and cultural political Zionism. Today's Jewish world may be astounded to learn that the largest number of progressive Jews in the world lived in pre-war Poland. Polish Jewry dilemmas and lessons are relevant to our moment. So this is just the part of the description of the next webinar. We invite you to read the whole and also to join us to listen to the presentation and to be part of the discussion that will come out after it. And today, if there are no more questions that I can see in the chat, I would like to once again thank to everybody and also to remind you that this webinar will be recorded. So if you know somebody who would be interested to see it, it will be published at the Friends of Jewish Renewal website. So you can also share it later or see it if you would like to remind yourself this time. Thank you very much. With that, wish you everything best for the end of the year and looking forward to see all of you in January.
Thank you, Dominika.